colleagues, please usher them in. Did everybody have a good lunch? Yes, no, yes? Okay. I see thumbs up sign. Okay, so it's the time of the day where we are in an air-conditioned room, we're full. So I know that everyone we might be sleepy, but I'm sure you will not in the next exciting session. So the Climate Food Nature Nexus is an approach for us to simultaneously strengthen climate resilience, build natural capital, and provide long-term solutions to food insecurity. But how can we maximize the gains from the Climate Food Nature Nexus? To find out more about this approach and also the gains and other insights from our distinguished panelists, let us call on Bruno Carrasco, Director General and Chief Compliance Officer of ADB's Climate Change and Sustainable Development. Over to you, DG Bruno.
Okay, a very good afternoon to all of you. Thank you very much for the warm introduction. I am the first one to say that I was the Chief Compliance Officer. I am no longer, and I'm happy that I've got that one off my shoulders. I wanted to welcome all of you to this session 2 on maximizing gains from Climate Food Nature Nexus. I do remember that the first session after lunch is never an easy one. Some of you maybe have a little bit of a jet lag, but I am sure with the quality of the presentations and the panelists, you will not miss that strong espresso that you may have wanted to have. In terms of a very brief set of introductory remarks from my end, the food security agenda is one where increasingly the intersectionality between food, climate, and nature is, of course, gaining greater and greater traction. The preservation of ecosystems is, of course, critical, and transitioning to a climate-smart, sustainable, and resilient agriculture is paramount. We are generally more comfortable or clear with looking at the first part of that nexus, the food-climate nexus, and how food systems both contribute and are impacted by climate. Bringing in that third leg, nature and biodiversity loss, perhaps we need to focus a little bit more on. We do recognize that the depletion of natural capital, including in our Asia-Pacific region, is happening at a very fast, unprecedented rates. I am sure that most of you are now familiar with the findings of the Dasgupta report, and that was quite a breakthrough in terms of bringing to everyone's attention the importance of preservation of natural capital. In ADB, under the leadership of Ching Feng and many others, we have come to appreciate much more looking at investment positive or natural capital positive investments, looking at such things as nature-based solutions. And I'm very glad to have on this panel a couple of my colleagues, Thomas and Yoko, who are very much leading a lot of that work together with Ching Feng and his team. In this session, we will have 2 keynote presentations, and they will bring out and illustrate some of the important case studies and highlight policy lessons to be able to maximize on the Nexus gains. This will be followed, of course, by a panel discussion with some excellent panelists, and they will, again, bring out some of the ways and means to maximize the climate, food, nature nexus. So, without further ado, we are going to start with 2 keynote presentations. The first one will be a video recording by Professor Michael Kremer, Professor of Economics at the University of Chicago and Nobel Economics Laureate. He's also a member of the Innovation Commission for Climate Change, Food Security, and Agriculture at the University of Chicago. This will then be followed by a presentation by Ismahan El-Wafi, who's the Executive Managing Director of sg-afnr. So without further ado, I will now go back to my seat and hopefully we can get the video recording on. Thank you.
The world faces interlinked challenges of climate change and food security. Smallholder farmers, particularly in low and middle income countries, are among those most vulnerable to climate change. At the same time, agriculture is responsible for 1/4 to 1/3 of global emissions. Multiple innovations can help boost the resilience of farmers and food systems, reduce agricultural emissions, or both. I'm presenting on behalf of the Innovation Commission for Climate Change, Food Security, and Agriculture, which is formed by former heads of state, cabinet ministers, and leaders from civil society and international organizations. The Commission identifies innovations with rigorous evidence of impact and cost effectiveness and develops concrete recommendations to transition them to scale. One key activity is identifying innovations that are ready to transition to scale. We adopted fairly strict inclusion criteria for these innovations. In particular, we focused on innovations with rigorous evidence of causal impact and cost effectiveness, typically from randomized controlled trials. We sought this evidence not only for the innovation itself, for example, flood-resistant seeds, but also for policies to increase adoption of the innovation. And we looked for innovations with a plausible pathway to scale. Within adaptation innovations, we focused on those serving people whose livelihoods are most vulnerable to climate change, smallholder farmers and landless laborers in low and middle income countries. For mitigation innovations, we focused on those that would deliver substantial co-benefits to low and middle income countries. Many of these have substantial benefits beyond the country that implements them, making them regional or global public goods. This means that individual governments' incentives to invest in them is not commensurate with social needs. International institutions can play a key role in supporting countries to adapt these innovations for scaling in their context, to refine and test them, for example, using A/B tests, and to scale them to boost resilience, food security, and agricultural productivity in the context of climate change. Knowledge generated by these efforts is itself a global public good. I'll start by discussing a few examples of adaptation innovations which already have strong evidence of impact and cost effectiveness, where more support could make a real difference in scaling. One such innovation is procuring and disseminating high-quality weather forecasts for farmers. Weather uncertainty increases risks to farmers. Not only do adverse weather events harm production directly, their risk decreases farmers' incentives to invest in productive assets, constraining productivity even in years with normal weather. Climate change is increasing the variability in rainfall, temperature, and the timing of seasons, creating more uncertainty for farmers. Advances in machine learning and artificial intelligence have enabled vastly more accurate and timely weather forecasts. These can help farmers adapt to changing weather patterns. In many areas, for example, monsoon onset can now be predicted a month in advance. Procuring regional forecasts of the onset of the Asian monsoon and similar weather systems in Africa, covering 12 countries with roughly 300 million farming families, is estimated to cost $23 million over 5 years. For India, the cost would be around $5 million over 5 years. There's strong evidence that farmers adapt agricultural practices in response to accurate forecasts, and that this substantially increases investment in yields. Estimated gains for just one type of forecast in India alone are in the billions of dollars. We don't have estimates for all 12 countries and all types of forecasts, but it seems clear that the benefits would be more than 100 times the cost. However, most farmers in low and middle income countries currently lack access to reliable, high-quality local forecasts. Improved weather forecasts could be disseminated to farmers using digital agricultural extension services, which is another innovation with rigorous evidence of impact and cost effectiveness. Timely, customized digital agricultural extension services delivered directly to farmers' phones provide a low-cost way to help farmers become more resilient to the changes in weather, pests, and soil salinity and chemistry that accompany climate change. For example, East African farmers who received SMS messages were on average 22% more likely to adopt agricultural lime for acidic soils, and were also more likely to use appropriate fertilizer. Digital agriculture has some setup costs, designing messages, A/B testing to confirm they work, but then very low marginal cost. At around 1/10 of a cent per text message, it's very cheap to add more farmers once the system is set up. This means that it's efficient to deliver at very large scale. With a large enough program, the average cost approaches the marginal cost as the fixed costs are spread across more farmers. A back-of-the-envelope calculation suggests a 46-to-1 benefit-cost ratio for very large-scale programs. Typically, it makes sense for national governments to deliver the messages since they can reach very large scale. It's more difficult for private sector organizations to reach efficient scale with the subscription model. Farmers can share information, so may have limited incentives to pay for advice. Millions of farmers are already benefiting from digital agriculture programs launched by governments, often working with technical partners to use principles of human-centered design and A/B testing to make messages relevant, accessible, and useful for farmers. For example, human-centered design principles were used to redesign soil health cards in Gujarat, India, and develop complementary multimedia materials to better convey information to farmers. Similarly, in Ethiopia, identifying the obstacles farmers faced when using the hotline and conducting A/B tests to refine the service substantially increased the fraction of users who successfully obtained advice from an agriculture hotline. The provision of weather forecasts can be an entry point for digital agriculture. This infrastructure can be leveraged to offer more complex digital agriculture services over time, such as services that facilitate connections among farmers and connect extension workers and farmers, provide farmers with information on input suppliers, or link farmers with each other or with cooperatives or contract farming operations that can purchase their output. Innovations in social protection can support households to cope with weather events and move out of extreme poverty. For example, digital agricultural extension services could also be combined with other digital services, such as anticipatory cash transfers, which can help farmers prepare for extreme weather events. Weather-responsive anticipatory cash transfers leverage forecasting models, remote sensing, and mobile banking to deliver cash to households ahead of climate-related disasters, such as floods. Growing evidence suggests that providing cash transfers ahead of floods can boost food security and resilience more cost-effectively than ex-post assistance. In Bangladesh, the World Food Programme used data-driven forecasting to send cash transfers to households about to experience severe flooding. Households that received the transfer before a flood hit were 36% less likely to go a day without eating and more likely to evacuate household members and assets, like livestock. To take another example, graduation programs are a multifaceted innovation designed to help poor households move persistently out of extreme poverty. The graduation approach, designed by the Bangladeshi NGO BRAC, is designed to equip households with the skills and productive assets to increase earnings and start a virtuous cycle of savings and investment. BRAC developed the approach in Bangladesh, and it has since been implemented in several other countries. Graduation programs have persistent positive impacts on consumption, assets, and earnings, with persistent benefits more than 3 times their cost. BRAC's graduation program in Bangladesh increased earnings by 21% 4 years after the asset transfer. Among villages that had been hit by a sustained drought, the graduation program protected households from incurring a 30% reduction in their assets, such as livestock. I've had time to discuss only a handful of the innovations. The enormous costs and risks of climate change justify investing in many potential innovations and mechanisms to take innovations to scale. It's great to speak today to many partners committed to innovation at the intersection of climate change, food security, and agriculture. We look forward to working closely with all of you to further develop and scale innovations and reach hundreds of millions of farmers.
Very good. So we've got some good innovations coming through under the first presentation, seeing how we can provide improved resilience, improved livelihoods, looking at innovative solutions, looking at how we can provide support ex ante, how we could come up with improved weather patterns to be able to address some of the large uncertainties that farmers face increasingly now, even more so with the advent of the climate crisis. For our second keynote presentation, we are so pleased to have with us Ismahan El-Wafi. She is the Executive Managing Director at sg-afnr. She will focus her presentation on the interconnectedness of climate, food, and nature, how food systems are impacted by and contribute to climate change, and how natural ecosystems, such as agroforestry, wetlands, and biodiversity, could help improve food system resilience through better management. Ismahan, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bruno. Good afternoon, everybody. A pleasure really to be with you today here and to give you a presentation on research and innovation to maximize gains and add a little bit more innovation than the one that were mentioned by Michael. So first, if we look at what are we expecting from food system looking at 2050. So we would like our agri-food system to be greatly improved nutrition, diet, and health. We're looking that they're gonna improve the living standards and the resilience of livelihood to shocks. We're looking that there have to be zero greenhouse gas emission or maybe even negative emission ratio. We're looking that the biodiversity loss will be halted and the general environment condition going to be improving. And we are looking that those agri-food systems going to be the engine of inclusion. All of this in addition to providing us food every day, which we tend sometimes to really underplay. So agri-food systems are mostly to produce food, and we can't live without food, whereas in all honesty, we could live without energy, and we could live without phones, but food is a must. So in addition to the food, which is the priority number one, we want all of this from our agri-food system. And all of this in an increasing, volatile, and warmer temperature. So let's look what we have right now. So today, our agri-food system, and it was mentioned by Michael and by colleague this morning, Schengen and other colleagues, is responsible for 37% of greenhouse gas emission. It does threaten 86% of species currently at risk of extinction. It does drive deforestation. It does account for 70% of the water, the fresh water, used globally. And unfortunately, we still have a third of it that is wasted and lost, both post-harvest loss and waste. But let's look at how did we fare in the last few years. And sincere thanks to Shannon for these slides. So if we look since 1990 to 2019, we did very well. We moved actually really the malnutrition, or particularly the poverty line, from about 38% to only 8% now. In terms of numbers, we have moved really poverty from about 2 billion people to about, right now we're saying about 821. So in the grand scheme of things, we have done very, very well from the 90s to 2019. And we could do that by calculating what we call the growth, the total factor productivity, which is the growth in output minus the input. And what we can see here, there is a different trends between different categories of countries. So in the low-income countries, what we see is that 2/3 of the production growth is driven by growth in input. So we're putting more labor, we're putting more input, we're putting more fertilizer, seeds, capital, and 1/3 only comes from technology development. If we look at the low middle income country, it's the other way around. So we have 2/3 that comes from technology, and we have 1/3 that come from increasing input. You go to the upper middle income countries, and there what you have that all the increase come from technology growth or progress, and you have very little addition of the input. You go to high income country, and it's another story whereby not only you increase productivity, but also you reduce input. And all of them come mostly from research and development. You look at it and you see in gray, it's the CGR R&D, research and development. You look at the orange, it's public research and development. So what we could see here is that really a huge portion of it comes from investing in research and development, and we are very glad as CGR that we were particularly very influential in increasing productivity in low and middle income countries. So what I want to say here is that this is how it used to be in the past. But right now, if we want to project to 2050, what's happening is that we don't need as much production increase. Our problems today are different. It's not about quantity, it's about quality. Quality of what we are producing and quality of how we are producing it. So the difference between before and now is that the first difference that we need a smaller incremental food production task for the next 30 years. And the other difference that is most regionally concentrated. So if you look at the regional distribution here, what we had in Sub-Saharan Africa, in South Asia, and the MENA, we had about 45% increase in 1999 to 2020, but we want it to be about 80% going forward in the next 30 years. So the problem is different, and we have to recognize it, because if we don't recognize that the problem is different, we're gonna keep doing the same. And today, what we need to focus on and what we need to invest in is different. And that's where CGR comes in play. So CGR had a lot of input, as we showed in the graph, for the last 1999 to 2020, but we'll have even more for the next 30 years. And that's where we are focusing on mostly 5 impact areas: nutrition, health, and food security. So we have to produce much more nutritious and much more fit for purpose in terms of communities and the region. Poverty reduction and livelihood and jobs definitely will continue to be very important going forward. Gender equality, youth, and social inclusion. We need to bring much more these subjects on the front when we are talking about increasing agricultural productivity. And of course, all of this has to be part and parcel of our adaptation, climate change adaptation agenda, and it has to respect environment, and it has also to make sure that it stops degrading the biodiversity. So I want to take you 4 examples, and believe me, I wish I had more time to give more, but just few examples to showcase to you what are really the breakthroughs and some of the innovation that would make producing food in the future different. The first example is from Timor-Leste, and it's actually a digital tools, like also what Michael mentioned on many digital tools that could make a difference. So the digital tools called Pescas will help us really monitor the fish and the fisheries and also the fish stock. And what will it bring to the farmers? It will bring to the farmers and to the communities a better way to know when to fish, when not to fish, what to fish, and what market to access as well. And this is already in place in Timor-Leste that allowed the government to really monitor better and to manage better their fish stock, but it's also in scaling up or in utilization in Tanzania and Kenya. The second example is from SIP on potato, and this is a zero-tillage rice straw mulch potatoes. So right now, instead of really disturbing the earth and not only getting to zero tillage, it's also you don't take actually the mulch of the rice. You leave it on the ground, and basically you are doing a kind of a soilless agriculture system on the field. The soil is there, but the soil is below the mulch. And what does it do? It does allow you to reduce evapotranspiration from your soil, but also it increases the humidity in the soil and it increases productivity. So this methodology is now, and really in many countries, it's part and parcel of many countries in the region, including India, including Cambodia, and other countries. The third example, it's the importance of data again for reducing the agriculture risk, the intrinsic risk that exists in the agriculture. And this is different project. One of them is with the Asian Development Bank looking at satellite imagery and allowing us really to help insurance companies to have the right data that will allow the farmers to maintain their income from the agriculture sector. So there are examples from Philippines, but there is also examples in India, and there are a number of programs that really use big data and satellite images to provide us that information. And my last example, and just to give some few examples, it's going back to what Dr. Fat said about irrigation and how important is irrigation. So this example is from Nepal, whereby the CGR centers, including IMI, brought a way to use the underground water in Nepal to allow farmers to have many crops per year and to have crops all year around. My last point, other than bringing different innovation, is that if we look at it at the bottom line, what do we need to do going forward, and how could we maximize really the climate, food nexus and environment nexus? So the most important, if I want to say one word, it's really to build resilience and diversification. And this is a paper with Hertel and colleagues on diversification of the enhanced food system. So as we are imagining our agri-food system going to 2050, what we want them to have is to be financially equitable, and that we can call it economic resilience. We want them to be supportive to whole community, that's social resilience, and we need them to minimize harmful input on the environment, and that's ecological resilience. And the only way to do it is to build in diversification along the whole value chain or the whole agri-food system. So we need diversification at the production level, at the market level, at the household level, and across. And unless we build that diversification from using much more species that we are using right now in crop, fish, and animals, in diversifying the market, not make only the global market the most important, but maybe think regional, sub-regional markets, but as well household income and the other component of the agri-food system. With that, I really want to leave you with this slide on with science we can. So given that the challenges are different, the only way going forward for us really to increase that productivity in those regions where we need it the most, particularly in Africa, in Southeast Asia, and in the MENA, is to do it based on science and innovation, and that's the investment plan of the CGR for the next few years. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ismahane, for another great presentation to kickstart the panel. We've seen a lot of the importance on innovation. We see the increasing demands from our food system that Ismahane has presented so well, not just nutrition, better diets, improved health, but also resilience to shock, biodiversity loss reduced, and engine for inclusion. So a lot of challenges just on that alone. I'm now going to move on to the second part of this second session, and that is inviting the panelists to come to the stage, and then we can start a conversation around many of these important themes that have been presented by Professor Kramer and by our last speaker, Ismahane. So let me begin by calling you up to the stage. I will not give you your due introduction because I think all of you have it in your programs. So as I call your name, please do come up to the stage. So let's begin by calling Jyotsana Puri, the Associate Vice President at IFAD. Please join us. You can take the first stage, first set so we keep to the kind of questions. You keep it, you're here. Sorry, there, yes, that's right. So that way we can keep to the questions. It's easier for me to keep track. Next, may I call Paul Winters, Executive Director, Innovation Commission for Climate Change, Food Security and Agriculture at University of Chicago. Thank you very much for joining us. Big applause. That's right, yes. Thirdly, I'd like to call on Ellie Fenichel, who's the Professor of Natural Resource Economics at Yale University. Next, I would like to call Rakibul Amin, who is the Head Program Management Science and Strategy Group, IUCN Asia Regional Office. Next, I have the pleasure to call on my colleagues, Yoko Watanabe, Director of Environment, Climate Change and Sustainable Development Department, Asian Development Bank. And last but not least, Thomas Pinella, Director, Natural Capital and Climate. Okay, so now I move also onto stage. Good. I hope you are comfortable. We're going to start, so again, this. Let's see if we get the technology working. Good. So now we're going to start with a conversation, and I'm going to begin by asking each of the panelists a question, and hopefully we can get a conversation going. So at any point in time, if any of you want to come in following on the answer to any of the questions that I've raised, please do feel free to do so. Once we go through the first round of questions, I would like to turn to the floor to see if you have any questions for our panelists. And then, time permitting, we can go for one final round of questions. So let me then perhaps start with Jyotsana. Jyotsana Puri, IFAD is doing some really interesting work in financing nature and food security. Could you share with us a little bit of the work that you've been doing at IFAD, looking at the approaches and perhaps some more inspiring examples further from what we've seen earlier? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bruno, for having me here, and and also for that question. So let me try and reflect on this using a couple of examples, and perhaps also, do I have a couple of minutes, you said? Okay. And then also reflect a little bit on, I think, where we could be going. So the first example is really an integrated program, and as the word, and it's approximately, it's jointly funded with the GEF, and FAO and IFAD are co-leading this, and as the word suggests, it's integrated because it really, so it's a food systems integrated program. So the important thing is to notice that the big top-level indicators of success in that integrated program are, one, land devoted to improved practices, where there is a definition of improvement. that is part of the protocol. Second, to ecosystem-based approaches, so land devoted to ecosystem-based approaches, which are all part of the results matrix. And this is really key because we are recognizing that while you produce food and more efficiently and you reduce food waste and loss and all of the things that we've been talking about so far, it is really important to also increase the biodiversity content of the work that we do. It also recognizing, so this is, like I said, a $250 million program, but with co-financing will become more than 1.2 billion. And the important thing is recognizing that we've got to work with not just small-scale producers and farmers, but also have to integrate really the local private sector. So I come back to the things that I spoke about in the morning, really have to bring back local private sector and integrate that into the overall production system as well as the value chain system. And so providing loans through green credit lines is one way of creating completely new markets. So in Mali, Senegal, etc., these are completely new markets of green credit lines that are essentially being put out, which weren't there earlier. Right? And the conditionality essentially goes through the creation of these credit lines and the on-lending that we do through public development banks, which are essentially ensuring that conditions in terms of participation, in terms of inclusion, women-headed households, biodiversity content are all met when we are on-lending. So that's one example. The other example is a large program. So again, we've all drunk the Kool-Aid on the private sector. We all think, well, the private sector really needs to come in if we've got to increase the impact on the ground. We can have a separate discussion about that. But I think the important thing is recognizing as to how public institutions such as ours, such as ADB, such as IFAD, are really creating the ecosystem where the private sector can come and play in a comfortable way. So the Africa Rural Climate Adaptation Financing Mechanism, or ARCAFEM, is one such mechanism. And what we are doing there is really creating a platform where IFAD can come in, where we are working with the Nordic Development Fund, where we are working with the Danes, as well as the GCF, to create this platform, but then working with Standard Bank, I beg your pardon, with Equity Bank in Rwanda, Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania, to ensure that they have the KYC, the Know Your Customer knowledge bank, and can on-lend and use their facilities to on-lend to small households and SMEs on the ground. So the first first loss is essentially borne by our bilateral funders, the second loss as well, and equity is essentially coming in for the commercial part, right? So that's a financial innovation that we are taking forward. And then the third example is the ASAP program, the Adaptation for Smallholder Producers program, which is essentially saying that, look, the concessionality of our loans can really be increased if we can blend it with grants that are coming from Adaptation for Smallholder Farmers. This is currently in its third generation, and we are aiming for a $500 million overall trust fund. It's currently at $100 million. And a large number of innovations have really been put out as a consequence of this ASAP program. So for example, things like digressive insurance, things like blockchain technologies, things like a lot of our impact assessment, which I do see as being very innovative, are all supported to a large extent by the risk-bearing element of our ASAP grant program that is taking this forward. I'm hoping I'll come to talk about some of the other innovations in my second round. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Jyotsna. So for many of the ADB colleagues, you will note the parallels. You've heard it earlier. We're not just a financial intermediary, we're also a knowledge intermediary. We don't necessarily have all the knowledge within these four walls, so we have to reach out to institutions so that we can learn from them. They can share their learnings with us, and we can be more effective in reaching out to the clients. So a lot of common understanding on that, Jyotsna. Next, I'd like to turn to Paul Winters. So from Michael's presentation, Paul, we saw some very interesting work being done on or at the Innovation Commission, particularly the work focusing on smallholder farmers, who of course are much more vulnerable to climate change and who tend to have small environmental footprint. in their food production. I'm very fascinated about the Innovation Commission, as I'm sure many of you are, and we'd like to know a little bit more about the Commission itself, your strategy for overcoming the challenges that we've heard this morning, and in delivering innovation to smallholder farmers, and what are some of the indicators of success. Thank you.
Thanks. So Michael's already explained a fair bit about the Innovation Commission. We launched it about a year ago. He's the chair of the commission, and I'm heading up the secretariat. And the idea behind the commission goes to what Ismahani was saying, right? That the problems that we face are different, particularly around climate change. And I was very happy to see your presentation. The history of agriculture is increasing productivity, as we saw, driven by input and output, the different total factor productivity. But what we now face is a different situation than we had in the past. We can't just increase productivity without considering the environmental consequences, the consequences of climate change, the fact that the climate is changing. And so we need to think of how innovations need to be thought about differently. Many of those innovations actually exist. So one of the premises of the commission is that there's a little bit of frustration, and I used to have Joe's job at IFAD, and one of my frustrations at IFAD was that I often had academics from universities, I had people from the CGIAR come, and they would come to me and say, look, we have this innovation, but we're getting to 10,000 farmers here and 20,000 farmers there, and we're not getting to millions of farmers. And it was frustrating because through IFAD, it wasn't an easy mechanism because the way multilateral development banks work is through loans. And so there's these challenges of overcoming some of the constraints our institutions and governments face in getting things to scale. So the idea of the Innovation Commission is to think about how we do that. Are the mechanisms to take things that have been shown that Michael talked about, that there's evidence out there that it works, that you get these incredible cost-benefit ratios of 100 to 1 to things like weather, 46 to 1 for things like digital agriculture. So why aren't we doing it? The problem is it's a little more challenging than when you just have a seed that can be transmitted through normal patterns of ag extension. Digital platforms require a huge fixed cost. You have to set them up. So it isn't a matter of just getting farmers to adopt. It's a matter of setting things up. The same with weather. We have to have the right weather. And we did this calculation for 12 countries, $23 million would all it would cost, and we'd get billions of benefits. But nobody's doing it because the commercial incentives aren't there. And so the private sector won't do it. And the governments, this is a global public good. So how are we going to do that? So the idea of the Innovation Commission was to come up, rather than talk generally about what innovations, the importance of innovations, the importance of ag research, let's find some innovations that are out there that can address climate change and agriculture and food security on the adaptation and the mitigation side, and let's see how we can take them to scale. So we've identified a number, 7 were announced at the COP. We have a list of about 15 to 20 where we think there's compelling evidence that these can be taken to scale. And now we're trying to think about how we can actually take them to scale. So some is working. We had meetings earlier today, and we've had some meetings with the Asian Development Bank about the possibility of working particularly in South Asia on some of these topics. We've been working with the Ministry of Agriculture and Farmer Welfare in India. They have between phone numbers of 50 to 100 million farmers there. We're trying to see if we can get weather information on soil through digital means to those farmers. There's a whole bunch of bottlenecks to fix to do that. And so can we work with the Asian Development Bank? Last week we met with the Inter-American Development Bank on the same type of project for the Andean region. There's huge fragmentation in digital agriculture. How do we overcome that fragmentation and create a basic platform? So innovation, so the problem is different, and we need different solutions, but innovation is also different. So we need to think about how we're going to use clever mechanisms to scale innovations that we have now. The last thing I want to say is our normal way of doing innovations is called push funding, where we provide grants to places like the CGR, National Ag Research Centers. That's great. We should continue to do that. We heard arguments earlier about why we should expand that and the importance of it. There are other ways to do funding, pull mechanisms, things like advanced market commitments that have been done in the health sector for vaccines and other things that show a lot of promise. And in these cases, so for vaccines, For pneumococcal vaccine, an advanced market commitment of $1 billion put out there to make a vaccine for the tropics. 3 companies developed it. They had a guaranteed market, and so it ended up getting into the arms of 270 million children. Can we use those kind of things in agriculture? Can we have advanced market commitments for microbial fertilizers or other things that show promise for mitigation in agriculture? So we need to also think about those, and that's part of what the Innovation Commission is doing.
Thank you. Thank you very much for those comments, Paul. I recall at the lunch, I think it was the Minister Victor from Palau was mentioning that we need to learn, but we need to learn fast. And the challenges are there. And the idea is how do we come together? I think that those results give us a lot of hope, a lot of interest, and a lot of ideas in terms of how we can do it faster and how we can do it at scale. So those are very important lessons. We look forward to continuing these partnerships. And I think just linking up a little bit what Jyotsna was saying, we do look at platforms so that we move away from project financing. We look more for programmatic approaches. We look for innovative financing mechanisms. So these are all important elements that I think strike a chord with certainly most of us here, if not all. Very good. Thank you very much. Let me now turn to our third panelist, and that's Ellie Fenichel. Ellie, in line with my opening remarks, natural capital. One of the main challenges in natural capital is to generate sustainable returns from long-term investments. We've been seeing before a cost-benefit analysis, a number of initiatives where that is imperative. How should we think about natural resources and assets in the agricultural production process, especially for cases where there are not clear cases for cash transfers? So how do we address that challenge?
So that's a great question. So first we need to think about what do we mean by an asset here if we're going to talk about natural capital or natural assets. And the way I like to think about assets is this is a way of storing opportunities for the future. We need to be able to access those opportunities, which means they're going to enter into some form of production process. If we're thinking about traditional agriculture, we get things that are clearly natural assets are things like soil organic matter, things like groundwater, things like pollinator populations, things like populations of animals that control agricultural pests. And you'd be hard-pressed to find a farmer that doesn't sort of say, yeah, these are part of my production process. These are part of the assets that I have. The problem is, even whether it's farmers, whether it's agriculture ministers, those things, because they didn't pay for them in the first place, they don't hold in the same part of sort of the mind of the process and what can be traded off and how things can be put together. And so we need to think more carefully about these as like, what is the overall balance sheet of the assets, of these real assets, not just financial assets, but the non-financial assets that go into these processes. And so the question is, how do you think about the value of these measures? Well, the same way we would for a firm that has a specialized machine, right? It might not be able to turn around and sell that machine on the market, but we can think about sort of the net present value that that machine is generating. And we can think about how changes in soil organic matter, changes in the availability of groundwater, change what a farm can produce. And we can observe these through changes in the way that farmers change their behaviors. Kind of like, I describe this like if you've read these stories in the press about how like the astronomers find new planets in distant galaxies, they don't actually see the planets, they see like wobbles in the stars or something. That's what we see, is we don't actually see the cash exchange, we see changes in the farmer behaviors dancing around as if there's a value for these assets. And we see this very clearly. We see farmers switching behaviors as they gain more access to water, or switching behaviors as they lose access to water. We're able to figure out how these assets should be valued, and then we can juxtapose that to other places where farmers or agricultural ministers are making decisions. And lo and behold, every time we've done this, it's like eye-opening for folks, because it's just they're holding these different parts of the process in different parts of their brain, and they can't put the two together. And so a lot of what we're trying to do here is help people get everything into a common unit to sort of see the whole picture. Other examples that we're seeing right now is it's hard to think about, we're worried about there not being a direct cash transfer, but often what's happening is that cash transfer is happening somewhere else in the system. It's capitalizing at a different scale than we're used to looking. I'm doing some work with some colleagues right now, and when I say we, they're doing most of the work, so I should be honest about this. looking at how changes in bat populations in the Midwestern United States have impacted farm productivity. And this is because bats eat lots of insects. They're a big pest control agent. And what's happened here is that we've seen farm revenues fall, we've seen ag land prices fall, and we're actually getting some new evidence that there's property tax shortfalls in the counties where these farms are operating, right? So that's where the cash transfer is happening. It's not between the farmer and the bat. The bats don't want money, they want insects, right? But the cash transfer is coming out of the production process in the public finance space. And so this is creating opportunities to think about what's the right scale of capitalization. And this has been a problem in agriculture for 100 years. And this goes back to the public goods problem, the common pool good problem, and this is where we need to be creative. And there's far more of these sorts of cash transactions or these transfers happening out there. We've heard of some of them. They're just not happening at the scales we're used to looking. We're more and more crop insurance, parametric insurance, these sorts of, we're seeing insurance policies written on coral reefs and forests. Clearly there's a cash flow at the other end if private sector insurance is willing to come in and write these policies and people are willing to pay premiums to get these policies. It's just capitalizing in a different spot than we're used to looking. There are also real savings effects that we've had trouble accounting for. That we know that if you cut down a forest above a water treatment facility, it drives up the water treatment facility's costs. But because they didn't pay for the forest in the first place, you can't think of like a perpetual inventory method to keep account of that. We just need sort of a little bit of new innovation that we actually know how to do. And so we see this over and over again, that the challenge is we're omitting very important assets in the production process from our accounting systems, from our assessment systems, and then trying to like fix somewhere else. And so we keep pushing so far. What we need to do is step back and go, what's this production process? What are the assets we're holding? Take a more sort of inclusive view of thinking about how we're deploying these assets and investing in them. And one of the best examples I can think of that, we think of food security, fisheries are really important in food security as well. If we look at the way fisheries are valued, it's as if all of the value add from fisheries comes from either labor or fishing vessels or fishing capital. But you know what? You need fish populations out there producing babies to have productive fishery. That is a real capital input into that fishery, right? And yet we leave it off of our balance sheets, right? We don't think of these as assets. We don't treat them as assets. And that's what we need to start doing. We need to keep a more comprehensive accounting. We need to think about the scales at which these things are capitalizing. And those are the places we can really get in and think about making it, driving investments. And then the behavior is actually happening. Farmers are smart. Fishers are smart. They realize these things matter. They're just holding them in different parts of their head.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ellie, for those observations. Again, it's about how you account for natural capital. If you can't price it, you can't value it, you can't measure it. We're seeing with the advent of the climate crisis, environmental degradation, and the externalities that creates. Again, need to price those in, factor them into the price. Thank you very much. We're going to now turn to our next panelist, Rakibul Amin. Rakibul, a large concern for food security is maintaining the integrity of soils, the importance of that, on which sustainable agriculture depends. How do you view the situation in the Asia-Pacific region, and what is being done, and what more can be done to address this concern? Thank you.
Thank you, Bruno. Before I answer your question, you need to tell me where did you get my Indiana Jones photo? That was 10 years ago, somewhere in Sundarban, I remember. Thank you for bringing back the memory. Yes, you're very right. And when we talk about agriculture, soil is the most important thing. And we think the soil is an inert material, art material, which is not. As Ele has mentioned, as this is an engine, and is it live? It's live because there is so much of biodiversity, there is so much of chemical, biological, physical process going on, and we don't see it, and we don't value it. The IPBS, Science Policy Platform for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, IPBS is equivalent to IPCC. They have mentioned that about 3.2 billion people is affected by land degradation, which is, in a sense, you can say, is soil degradation. And it accounts for 10% of the annual global gross product, which is a big number. FAO regularly publish the status of soil, or global soil status, which also gives a very grim picture. So we are in a production overdrive, and naturally the soil cannot keep up with this, what you call renewable property or rejuvenating property. And that's a big issue. And when we say what can be done, yes, it's also, the answer lies in your first introduction, where we need to bring the nature nexus in the whole discussion of climate and food nexus. We know about soil contribution in climate change. We know about emission potential, and also there's LULUCF, AFLU, so I don't want to discuss about that. But how do we bring that nature context? So IUCN, we are International Union for Conservation of Nature, very much nature focused, but increasingly we realize unless we discuss about agriculture and talk with the agricultural stakeholders, we are missing a big issue. Ismahani, in her presentation, you mentioned agriculture contributes about 83 to 87% of biodiversity loss. So we need to talk with agricultural sector. And this is how we started our land health initiative and common ground dialogue. We are trying to bring people from agricultural sector and conservation sector talk with each other. In the morning, the minister from Vietnam and Dr. Fa from China Agricultural University was mentioning about exactly on this point, that we need to have more dialogue. The same government, maybe agricultural ministry, they are looking for production, where the environment ministry, they are responsible for NDCs, they are responsible for NAPs, adaptation and climate change to national document. They are also producing this national strategy for biodiversity and action plan. By December, the countries need to submit their NDC 3.0. Countries are also producing the NBSAPs, which is very much due. And everywhere, like if you take about SDG targets, 15.3 talks about land degradation. The GBF, Global Biodiversity Framework, target 10 talks about halting degradation in forestry, agriculture, fisheries, and aquaculture. So they're setting targets, but somehow these two are not talking. And this is where we need more dialogue and discussions. And this is where IUCN thinks this nature-based solution can help produce that common ground and common ground of actions. And when we say nature-based solution, it's just not planting trees, it's about using nature, but don't undermine the net positive biodiversity output, not undermine the nature. How do you do that? The simple example in case of land degradation is avoid deforestation, avoid land degradation in the first place, adopt more land management, sustainable land management practices, which is part of the land use policy of the country. As it's not only agriculture, it is a cross-sectoral, cross-issue, multilateral, multi-stakeholder participation to do that. And also we should not forget agriculture, it has a culture element in it, agri plus culture. So traditional knowledge and the farmers, and one of the reasons in Asia is that we are talking about large scale smallholding farmers. So even if you have national scale policies, it's very difficult to translate at the very small scale, very poor farmers. So how they are doing traditional practices in many cases, but as LA has mentioned, how do you incentivize, how do you pay that the public goods they are protecting? Lastly, I would say that, there are, Yoko, where we have been having a discussion in Bangkok on Satoyama initiative. It's an initiative launched by Japan government under the CBD to protect this traditional production landscape. So this kind of things we need more. And also, like in the How region, there's a wetland, vast wetland in Bangladesh where thousands or hundreds of migratory birds comes. And that area, farmers doesn't necessarily need very much agricultural input because that fertilizer input, actually nitrogen input, comes from the bud dropping from there. So this is where very simplified linkages about nature, agriculture, and the climate. And ADB, I know, is also investing on protecting those flyway sites. And we have joined ADB for the NBS financing hub, and this kind of mechanism and this kind of partnership will help in future. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rakibul, for those reflections. Just on that last point, we recognize that nature-based solutions, looking at it from an investment side, may not be able to bring the returns unless we're able to bring together the expertise that allows us to structure financed projects and to be able to generate that income stream to then make them investable or bankable. So that's one of the challenges that we face. I also, in listening to you, Rakibul, the idea that a farmer is a very sophisticated economic agent, knows the uncertainties he or she faces, the risks, and so there's a lot of learning there, but there are other learnings that can come in from technology, and how in some ways it's an issue of bringing together that information and knowledge together to get those returns. But anyway, very, very inspiring. I'm now going to turn to our two colleagues. Yoko, climate, food, nature cuts across the different themes. You are very much part of that nature finance hub work. We do nevertheless see sometimes competing demands. How do we ensure that nature is not a silent voice? Who speaks for nature? And how do we build up the nexus to help improve climate resilience and food security? Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you very much, first of all, for having me here among the distinguished speakers here. And it's great pleasure to be representing here. The intersection of climate and food and nature really presents a complex challenge. And we all know that there is sometimes a conflicting priorities as well, and some trade-offs are necessary. But however, we really need that recognize that the deliberate actions to ensure nature voices are not overshadowed and be actually more on the center of this nexus. We really need to work together, and we really need to bring climate resilience and food security together with the nature as it provides the solution, as nature-based solution does, and also enables the sort of the asset and value, as the former speakers have mentioned. A very practical person, so let me jump into 4 recommendations that we have in order to have nature in the center and part of the partners among the food security and climate nexus. So first of all, I really think that we really need to approach this in an integrated manner, and the policy frameworks that comes with it, and also not only the policy development, but enforcement part really comes with an integrated fashion. This morning, the Palau minister, Mr. Victor, have mentioned that both agriculture and environment ministries need to come together. And some of the countries actually have that in one ministry, which is great. And some countries, they need to talk to each other. And we sometimes, have that struggle as well. And so we, in order to understand both the benefit of the biodiversity and the need for agriculture and food security, we really need a more concerted efforts to have a policy dialogue together in an integrated manner, as we all just mentioned, all the speakers has mentioned. And I think there is many opportunities that organization like ADB has, and also in my former experience when I was at the Global Environment Facility working on biodiversity, mentioned to the Ministry of Environment saying that now I need to go to the Minister of Agriculture to work about biodiversity. And he said, why? Why not to my ministry? And we totally understand that understanding, but as we understand that 30%, even more, of the biodiversity loss comes from agriculture. Over 10% of the climate change greenhouse gas comes from agriculture. I'm not blaming agriculture at all. Agriculture is a really important sector, as we all talked about, and this is a matter of food security, people's improvement, health, and everything. We need to really work together so that this is a solution towards these global environmental issues. And second of all, the very important part is that we leverage nature as the solutions and for climate resilience and food security, as I mentioned. We see that forests and grasslands and wetlands and coastal areas, those restoration really provides the resilience to and the nutrition and the needed natural resources towards agriculture, both on the land as well as in terms of ocean and marine and fisheries are concerned. And in that regard, the regenerative agriculture that really brings in the rich soil health, water efficiency, biodiversity, and resilience can bring in really important element. And I really think we have gone beyond the pilot phase for regenerative agriculture. And we are able to now scale this up, particularly in Asia, and really show that this is a viable sort of approach that we can demonstrate around the world. And third, I also want to inform that biodiversity is in the center, better understand about the biodiversity benefits in that way, and also understand that this is really important for climate. So biodiversity plays a clear role, particularly like coral reefs, mangroves on extreme weather, and hydrocyclones, and also reduce food insecurity. So there is a really direct link in terms of those nexuses. And finally, what I really believe is really we need to bring community at the center of this initiative. Community people have been the steward of these natural resources for years, and they have been balancing the need for using those resources and protecting it. Satoyama Initiative that just was mentioned is a good example from Japan, living in harmony with nature and try to balance the need of both sort of resource use and protection so that there is a sustainability towards it and our future generation, the children and the beyond can really benefit from these resources. And for that, I just also wanted to share some of the examples that ADB has been able to show in scale of these initiatives. One is that we use it quite often, but the China example on the Yangtze River economic belt, this is a really great example of nature-based solutions that enable that ecological environment and improving water security, increasing the resilience of climate change, can really make the improvement to livelihood of the local communities and have that needed balance. And the green ecological corridor that we developed in integrated landscape management approach has really yielded that benefit on both food security as well as biodiversity needs. And in that regard, sometimes the agriculture expansion, we really need to balance to understand the environmental biodiversity richness and the importance, and sometimes offset or in terms of trade-off and enable that other parts are expanded or other parts are protected. And those are able to be done if you did the science right and also policy exchange right. And I think that is what we really need to do. And I also wanted to talk about a little bit about the finance need with the Nature Solutions Finance Hub. We have launched this initiative in COP28 to scale up these type of work at ADB and with partners so that we can expand these type of experiences and initiatives in the region and share that beyond the region to the global scale. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Yoko. So at the Asian Development Bank, there's a lot of very exciting work that's happening in this area. Sponge cities, as Yoko mentioned. We've got wetlands restoration through migratory bird patterns. We've got mangrove coverage. We've got a very exciting initiative in terms of community resilience partnership, where we're basically looking at adaptation initiatives at the local communities where they know best what it is that they want. So a lot of exciting areas. Thank you very much, Yoko. Next, I'm going to turn to Thomas. Thomas, this is an easy question for you. Nature and ecosystem services provides what is at the foundation of food security and climate resilience. However, we do recognize that it's hard to convince people to invest in nature. So going back to, does nature have a voice? If it does have a voice, how do we get it so that we can invest in nature? Could you share some of your approaches and experiences in mainstreaming nature positive approaches into investment? So we've talked a little bit about that. Maybe you can expand further. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Bruno, and to all the panelists for taking the time to be here today. Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about how we're approaching investment in natural capital, which my group under our new reorganization is responsible for. It'll talk about snippets of where we're investing in ADB to give you a range of the ideas of the entry points, and then perhaps how we can bring that all together. So in our approach to investment in natural capital, we're not only looking at the actual physical investments, but there's a focus on institutions, capacity, and knowledge, as you said. And so these are from actual investment projects that, you know, we are doing quite a bit on regenerative agriculture in terms of using crop residue, tillage practices. We've also had programs for organic certification working with our client countries. And these result not only in improved environmental sustainability of the agricultural sector, but in improved livelihoods. And that's got to be central to everything that we talk about in terms of agriculture and the nexus with the environment. And we've also had a large push on nature-based solutions in the rural development and water resources space with, I'll come back to wetlands. We do have this regional flyway initiative. It's a $3 billion ambition. And we have a project right now in the PRC under processing for a fully aligned project with the Regional Flyway Initiative. And it's not just about wetlands. I think we all know that it's about water management, about climate change adaptation and mitigation, and all these co-benefits. And again, we're finding receptive audience to this. And it's not also just terrestrial ecosystems that ADB is involved with. The coastal zone is a huge concern for Asia and Pacific region. And so we have worked effectively in India on constructing artificial reefs, beach nourishment, sand dune restoration, native vegetation, and we have quite a big pipeline of projects in the coastal area and in Pakistan, as well as Vietnam. And a lot of this does come back to mangroves, which provides the disaster risk reduction. It provides habitat for fisheries, food security, and you also get tremendous carbon sequestration. So you get all of these benefits. But I think the important part is getting the evidence base and bringing the client along with us on this journey, because we can only convince so much, but what will make it easier for us in the future is educating and making our clients aware to demand these types of projects and recognize that the direct and co-benefits that they bring. And also I'd like to just mention that we also are investing, when I say institutions, it can be a range of things, but also market mechanisms. So we have developed many different funds that will use sovereign finance, that will crowd in commercial finance, and have funds that then are available for agricultural small, medium enterprises. And to access those funds, you need to demonstrate climate, or environmental benefits. So they're all tied to this. In a recent project, we had an equity investment fund going into small, medium enterprises that had climate, renewable energy, ecotourism, all of these to promote these things. We even had one project using land value capture where we supported the government to create a fund where it would rehabilitate assets to improve the environmental quality. That land was worth more money. It was then on the transfer of that land or the lease of that land value capture was kept by the government to put into a fund to revolve to further advance environmental sustainability. Eco-compensation and payment for ecosystem services, we've been heavily involved with in the PRC particularly. We're supporting the issuance of the national regulation on eco-compensation. We've had many pilots to promote this, as well as support an international conference. Coming back to the valuation point on ecosystem services, we have our own ongoing work on an ecosystem valuation tool with our economics research department, but we're also using gross ecosystem productivity in several projects as a way to appraise and evaluate projects. So again, getting a more realistic and holistic picture of the benefits. Lastly, on institutions, we've supported many cross-ministerial mechanisms because this is a constraint to getting green solutions put in place, and agriculture is a big part of this. This has included lake management agencies, and the other thing that we can provide that is technology. So we do provide quite a bit of digital decision-making tools, remote sensing, and these are a range of investments and grant financing that come together. And I think Yoko mentioned the Yangtze Riverbelt project, but we also have a Yellow River Ecological Corridor program that draws on the lessons from the Yangtze, and I think it's a very good approach that brings all these elements together in a landscape base and context that's underpinned by 15 different technical assistants from biodiversity planning, climate change adaptation planning, water management, and policy development, including the Yellow River Basin Law, supported by up to $2 billion investment with ADB. So the knowledge is taken forward through our investment and a very sophisticated client to really realize all these objectives of nature, economic development, and agriculture. I'll leave it there.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Thomas. A great set of examples. And a lot of this work we do, again, with partners in terms of eco-compensation, natural capital accounting. We have partnerships with the Chinese Academy of Science, Stanford University, and that's where we build that knowledge base to then look towards investment projects that can put that knowledge into practice. Ismahane, you have the last word before we're going to try to open it up quickly to the floor. CGIAR, what role do you see CGIAR to help Asia-Pacific mainstream nature-based solutions such as agroforestry, wetlands, biodiversity, water and natural resource management, and building that into food security? Your thoughts, please.
So as we talked, we all agree that we need more innovation and we need it to be fit for purpose. So if we agree that we need to continue producing food, but it has to be more nutritious, it has to be respecting the environment and the natural resources. So we need really to invest more to find the right solution for different ecosystems. I want to just ring a bell that right now, and I didn't have a chance to mention it, right now we have 350 million people that are in extreme malnutrition. With +2 degrees, that number gonna become 539 million people. With +4, we get to 2.1 billion. So we should agree that we should really stop the global warming. So how do we do that? So I think we are a little bit focusing too much on the agri-food system, and rightly so. So the agri-food system is the only system that can sequester, that can clarify the air, that can clean up the air. But how do we want to do it without investing in it? And when I talk about investing in it, it's not only investing in research and development, it's investing in small-scale producers. And that's where we see dichotomy. We have been talking about the carbon credit market for the last 20 years. Does small-scale farmers have access to that market? No. We have been talking now about nature-positive carbon credit. Does small-scale farmers have access to that? No. Even low-income countries, they don't have access to it. I was in Gabon last January, not this year, last year, and the Minister of Environment told me, we changed our forest management for the last 8 years to get access to the carbon market. Guess what happened? By the time the 8 years went by, the standards changed. Gabon has no access to the carbon market. So we are saying that the solution is there, and I agree the solution is there, but we are misaligning everything. We are misaligning the finance, the policies with the innovation, and I think that's what we need to recalculate and invest in science and innovation, invest in small-scale farmers, and make the right policies and the right incentives so that we move towards more sustainability and resilience.
Very good. Thank you very much, Ismahani. We literally have a few more minutes left. I would love to hear anyone from the floor if you have any comments or questions. Yes, please identify yourself and indicate who you pose the question to. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm Pankaj Tyagi. I'm working with Government of India. Yeah, my question is first with Jyotsna Madam regarding the financing part of innovative platform that was in which CGF through IFED, through financial institution, and then banking, and then the final client. So it's a lot of intermediaries between it. It's enhancing the cost of the financing. So why not directly from CGF to directly implementing agency? That will reduce the cost a lot. That is and one small comment to CGIAR, ma'am. In the Nepal example, actually we have seen the groundwater extraction with the pipeline. It would have been better to use solar pump instead of electric pump for the maximizing gain from climate, food, nature. Thank you.
Two more questions and then we'll have to stop because otherwise we're going to run into time and I'm going to be in trouble.
Thank you very much. I'm Margaret Yuwatana from the Department of Agriculture, Thailand. And I'm also some founding member of the ASEAN Climate Resilience Network, or ASEAN CRN. And I'm also a member of the ASEAN Negotiating Group on Agriculture under the UNFCCC and negotiating for agriculture. And Thailand, I'm originally a Filipina, but I'm a Thai civil servant now. Okay, so Thailand is a member of sg-afnr and most of the international organizations. And Thailand is quite responsive to the policies of these international organizations. And just some observation that we have good ideas. And all are aimed to have food security in the region and the global level. When we negotiate with under the UNFCCC or COP, Conference of the Parties, I just trying to comprehend what sensitivity is it. The word food system is sensitive. The word agroecology is sensitive. And there are emerging words that we, the policymakers, are quite when we try to evaluate projects. For example, we try to promote climate-smart agriculture. And then here comes the landscape approach. And then here comes the agroecology, the nature-based solutions. I heard all of this since this morning. But one word that strikes me, and this is really my observation, is that we need impact assessments. We have been very responsive to these projects, to these policies of international organizations, and we are actively engaged. However, when the time that we need to report back to our ministers or the Prime Minister itself, the return on investment is always a question. And the adoption rate is always the question. And so these are the reality check. We need really to comprehend what has been done in these nice dialogues here, policy dialogues here.
Okay, thank you very much.
So my question is sorry for that. I hope that the international organizations are also abreast, updated with what is reality, what is real happening in the nationals. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. A hard call to reality. We'll come back to that one. It's a very important role in development impact of all of this work. I've got time for two more. I've got Kosturi on the one side, and I don't know, I have two people who came in first. If you can just really reduce the question or comment to 1 minute, you can get all three of the last word. Kosturi, please.
Yes, it's an excellent discussion, and congratulations to the panel, esteemed panel. It is really heartening to hear about people talking about soil health, ecosystem-based approaches. But one thing I want to bring here, which I have not heard as yet, is that the real custodians of the soil, the indigenous people, they have been living in harmony with nature for such a long time. And they are sitting with, they are the repository of a huge amount of traditional knowledge, which are very scientific, sophisticated, and technology and science doesn't happen only in labs, they happen here on the fields also. And these are millennia of knowledge that they are sitting on, which are regarding the irrigation, land management, crop diversity, etc., etc. So are we investing on their knowledge and harnessing their knowledge and bringing it into integrating in all these other projects? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kosturi. Very good question. Knowledge and how is it coming through? 1 minute and 1 minute, please.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Christian Mariel A. de la Cruz from Pampanga State Agricultural University. As a student seeking advice from professionals, how can we support local farmers in adopting agricultural technologies without challenging their ego or existing practices, particularly in educating them to minimize pesticides use for environmental sustainability and healthier produce, with an aim of improving the quality of their produce and reducing the likelihood of rejected crops? Thank you.
Very much. And the very last one.
Hi, my name is Raf. I'm a social entrepreneur. I work with 120 indigenous families in 3,000 hectares in Zambales. Our area burns every year and it floods every year. We started with agritourism, now we're planting cashew. I just wanted to ask, are there ways to connect with each of you? Because I took notes of each of the things you said, and it feels like there's a treasure trove of information that we could access. And I'm part of a bigger coalition of small enterprises that work in the countryside. So anyway, just thank you, and I'm very interested to connect with each and every one of you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. All excellent questions. There's still more. Okay. I'm going to ask Ramesh whether I can indulge in another 5 minutes. Really, last one, second to last and last one, really. Otherwise, you won't be able to hear the answers, so you decide. Please.
Yes, hello, good afternoon. My name is Esther Penuña from the Asian Farmers Association. And thank you for all the valuable insights of the panelists. And my question is directed to all or any one of them. Now, in our experience, when we talk about climate, food, and nature nexus, the visibility of small-scale women farmers immediately come to our minds because they are most vulnerable to climate disasters. They are producing the food, as much as 80% to 90% of the food in the Asia-Pacific region, and they use firewood, they use the wells, the waters in the wells, in the springs, to provide the food and energy for their family. So my question is, in your experience and in your projects, what is the role and the position that you hold for small-scale women farmers? How do you recognize them? And how do you maximize the gains from involving them in your projects? What can be the challenges and ways forward? I will bring your answers to our small-scale women farmer members. Thank you.
Very important. Thank you very much. Very key stakeholder. Last question to you, and then I will ask the panelists to do a fast talk, pick up on any of the questions, and just try to cover it very quickly, please. Thank you.
Good afternoon, panels, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Eunice Lois Miranda from the Student Council of College of Agriculture Systems and Technology of Pampanga State Agricultural University. So here's my question. How can sustainable agricultural practices such as regenerative agriculture, agroforestry, and precision farming contribute to enhancing food production while simultaneously mitigating climate change and protecting natural ecosystems? That's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I really, for those of you who still had questions, I'm sorry, send us emails and we'll try to address them. But now I want to turn to the panelists. Panelists, may I ask you not to pick up on everything, maybe a couple of questions, answers to the point, please, so that we can get through within the next 5-6 minutes. Thank you.
Okay, rapid fire. So first, why is GCF not going directly? I think you should speak to GCF board, but the important thing is that there was clearly a constraint, right? There's a big fund out there of climate, and it needs to work with smallholders, and clearly a lot of the international agencies, ADB, IFAD, et cetera, all there, and we've got systems on the ground to also know our customers and get to the clients. So essentially it's using that structure. But I think the key thing here, and it responds to some of the other questions, is really recognizing that agri-food systems are currently a source of greenhouse gas emissions. So as Ismahan said, 86% of overall deforestation is due to agri-food systems. We also know that more than 1/3 of the overall greenhouse gas emissions come from agri-food systems. But we know that they can be transformed into sources. So FAO has done this study where if you adopt protein positive, infrastructure relevant, increased efficient, and one more thing, looking at low methane transformation of the agri-food system, you can actually make the agri-food system a net sink by 7%. So 7% of the overall greenhouse gas emissions will actually be absorbed if you take in all of those changes in the overall agri-food system, right? So you've got the opportunity. And what you're doing through this structure is essentially using the opportunity and the knowledge that a lot of the institutions here have gathered already. And here, the indigenous peoples, and Esther, your point, absolutely right on. Right? 80% of the world's biodiversity, the custodians are indigenous peoples. We've changed our definition of what is knowledge, and knowledge on neglected and underutilized species that is coming from indigenous people, and are using farmers' organizations both to transmit the investment as well as ensure that the knowledge is coming back to IFAD so that we can use that in our project design. I'll stop here.
Thanks. I'll respond to the comments partly from the woman from Thailand. You know, I hear all those different things, landscapes, regenerative agriculture, nature-based solutions, et cetera, and we're asked as the Innovation Commission, do you believe in these things? And my answer is always, if it has an impact, right? I mean, those are broad categories of things, and what we really need to identify, going to your point on impact, is we need to have evidence that it has impact, and we need to do that. And then going to Esther's question, that impact has to be broad and very inclusive of women. So one of the things you often find working on a analysis in Nepal, it's actually an EFAD project, and what we found is that it benefited men and it benefited women in the project. We separated out, but it didn't actually help women catch up to men. So there was a gap between the men and women, and yes, they both benefited, and now that gap is just higher than it was before. But it didn't actually lower that gap at all, and the same was true with indigenous people in Nepal. And so you have to be very conscious of, when you're promoting innovations, are you actually addressing these underlying structural differences between men, women, between indigenous, non-indigenous populations? And quite often we're not, because we actually don't try to address the specific constraints in those groups. Well, that's what I was saying about evidence. The impact assessments are what give you that evidence to decide. So absolutely, that's what you need.
So I'm going to continue on this impact assessments question. And I think one of the challenges is we can do impact assessments at the micro or project level. And this is what my colleague here is talking a lot about. And those are super important. But we also need a way of thinking about these at the macro level. And we need to think about sort of the overall balance sheet approach. Right now, when we look at how countries are doing, we look at things like GDP. This is basically a gross revenue statement. And you would never give a loan to a firm that only showed up with a gross revenue statement and not a balance sheet, right? But we do this all the time with countries, right? We do this all the time. And so I think if we're going to think about evaluating things, we need to not just think about them on the project by project level, but we need to be able to have a balance sheet that can integrate across those projects to tell us really whether or not we're building wealth, and whether that wealth is in the soil, whether that wealth is in the water, or whether that wealth is in the bank. We need to be able to track all of that. The other question I want to address very quickly was the one about how to work with farmers. And I was going to say, humility. We show up as experts, and farmers are experts too, right? And it's all about humility. And my greatest successes in working with farmers have been I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm looking at your data, and all I'm going to do is try and pivot it to a different set of units. And they go, oh, wow, we hadn't thought of it that way. And it's a collaborative process. The best way, so my grandfather used to say, it's the best way to make a friend is ask a question. The best way to make an enemy is give an answer to one. So I hope I'm not making an enemy right now. But the point being is working with farmers, it's often best just to ask them questions. Let them figure it out. Guide them. Don't tell them.
Yeah, I mean, following up from LA is giving the voice. Estrella, the issue you have mentioned about recognizing women's farmer. This is, I think, is a chronic missing link when we design projects and also implement. There are multifaceted issues, and one is intersectionality and a deep-rooted land tenure system. This is where this rights, governance, equity, this is where our projects needs to be. When we say ours, that means talking about everyone. It needs more attention, and this is where we have improved a lot from the past. But I would say it's a continuous process and a relentless effort that we are doing. In our NBS standard, this has been highlighted very, very strongly, and also the IPLC issues, indigenous local community issues, is also there. And on the, I'm going back to the first question asked to me, was of the soil. Nature indexes or nature connection with this whole. How do we measure impact? There are so many methodologies, but not necessarily linking with the nature. This is what we are now trying to develop, a land health monitoring tool, and maybe we can discuss it with further on when time permits. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I particularly wanted to thank the women's group, the indigenous peoples, the SMEs, and the agribusiness people, and also the youth who stood up and made the comments and questions. In terms of ADB is concerned, first of all, I am here in Manila, so for the Filipino colleagues who had questions and all, please feel free to contact us, and we can have a follow-up discussion with the relevant colleagues and relevant departments. And also, what I really wanted to emphasize is that the environment team, the agriculture team really works hand to hand and works on regenerative agriculture issues, many other integrated approaches together. And I think we walk the talk and try to move on to these integrated approach. And in terms of approaching women's group and indigenous peoples, there are quite a lot of mechanism within the programs where we provide small grants or sort of innovative funds and other initiatives, and we'll be very happy to share those opportunities as well. And we are increasing those approaches within the Regional Flyway Initiative, with Women's and Heat, and many other programs that we have. So I think there is a lot that we can discuss and offer and try to see how we can further these initiatives. We have definitely a commitment of leaving no one behind and working together on these issues. And I come from that background, and I really look forward to working with all of you. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. A lot has been said. I just want to come back to the gender issue that ADB and most of the other agencies sitting up here take that very seriously, and all of our projects are rated in terms of how they contribute to gender, indigenous peoples, and having been country director in Afghanistan, worked extensively there and in Pakistan, it is a challenge sometimes to come up with these types of programs. And in fact, doing agricultural programs in Afghanistan, men do the farming, so we actually had to come up with separate project components on poultry, livestock, goats that actually women could participate in. So you really need to think creatively, but there are entry points, even in some of the most restrictive environments culturally, to deal with these things. But we also need to rely on the communities and to give us guidance and help us put these projects together.
Thank you. So I think colleagues have addressed most of them. I want to just come back on the gender, the importance of gender and indigenous knowledge. And maybe to close, I think nature, it's beauty. Beauty, it's many colors. And many colors for me, it means diversification, and it means multiplicity of options. So we tend to simplify it, and we want one solution, or maybe we are very happy sometime with 20 solutions, but what we need is thousands and thousands of solutions. And that's where really we need to have all actors, but we need to invest in agriculture, because agriculture is the source of life, is the source of food, and it could be the source of the solution to the climate change. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I think that this has been an excellent session. I told you you didn't need coffee. I wanted you to give a big applause to Michael, Jyotsna, Paul, Ali, Rakibul, Yoko, Thomas, and Ismahane. Thank you so much. You've been great. And lastly, I wanted to thank all of you. You've been very inspiring with all your questions, and that's what we want to see more and more of. Thank you very much.